Going to be the first session in a series of classes discussed or based upon the Geulah seminar, the material that I'm trying to get out to try to change the situation as it stands right now for the Jewish people. Ideas, very important concepts and ideas that are crucial for understanding what's happening historically for the Jewish people and what it is that we can do about the situation. The seminar was designed in order that people should be able to learn the material and to learn it well and to actually give it over and perhaps actually create their own seminars and or if possible to arrange seminars for others to give over. The material will be available in audio form. It's obviously available in written form, and there's a video that was made just to show the presentation of some of the material, and this basically will focus on the essential points that have to be understood, or at least what the basis of what the actual seminar is all about. The reason for the seminar is obvious. I mean, anybody living in Israel, anybody who knows the material that I've been giving over for the last couple of years knows that the focus has been primarily on getting people to realize that Eretz Israel is where it's at. The problem with that message is that often, I mean, obviously with a person with a Zionist background, somebody who certainly holds that way in the first place, is excited to hear a message like that and to hear sources to back up that perspective. The problem seems to be people who should understand and realize the importance of this and why this is where things are holding historically today, that after all that's going on, all the issues, all the basic ideas and things that confront us, that economic issues, political issues, what's going on in Europe, what's going on with the Islamic world, there's a lot of very, very important major issues that people could think about, get involved with, and yet Eretz Israel is at the center of everything, the center of the entire world's attention, and that's not a coincidence. The reason for that, and that's it's not it has to be addressed. People understand and realize that there's a specific reason for that, and it's a call to the Jewish people, and the living by Torah mitzvahs, as important as that is, and again, there's a very important distinction to be made, and that is Torah mitzvahs are the way to earn and maximize your schar in the world to come. There's no other way. That's the best way to do it. And in that respect, living in Israel perhaps is just one mitzvah, although there's lots of mitzvahs tied to it. As we'll see, it's not really just exactly people understand, it's just one mitzvah. But in terms of protection in this world, that's a different issue. A person can die in this world, al-Kiddush Hashem. People were killed during the Holocaust, learning. And when they're learning, when they're davening, it's tefillas, they were doing exactly that which earns a person's schar in the world to come. And it did, in fact, earn the person's schar in the world to come. And certainly it's Mesiras Nefesh, but it didn't necessarily guarantee protection in this world. That can be a different issue because there are mitzvahs of the Zman, mitzvahs of the time. But it is important to realize that the very last thing the Jewish people did wrong that prevented us from being able to go in to Eretz Israel and to complete the mission that Moshe Rabbeinu had begun back in Mitzrayim, and that was the Meraglim, that was the spies. The spies spoke badly about Eretz Israel, and they were punished kind of more than what most people think would be the appropriate punishment. And as much as they came back and they said that we're not rejecting you, Kodesh Baruch Hu, we certainly believe in you. There was no need for any kind of seminar to prove the existence of God. We certainly hold by Torah Sinai, because as much as that may be an issue for generations of Jews in the future, that wasn't one for us because we were there. We witnessed firsthand that Kodesh Baruch Hu gave the Torah Mount Sinai, so that wasn't an issue as well. We want, in fact, the whole point of being in the midbar is that we want to continue to learn Torah in this ideal situation. We want to continue to be able to do mitzvahs without having to be bothered with conquering the land and planting the land and securing the land and all the things that go along with taking over Eretz Israel. And we've had a very ideal situation. We like the idea of getting up in the morning and learning Kollel all day long and coming back at the end of the day and having food prepared because it was man, and all the ideal situations, including not having to worry about Parnasa. It's great. I mean, that's what it's all about, isn't it? So Kodesh Baruch Hu came back and said, not only are you rejecting Eretz Israel, and you think it's just one thing you're rejecting, but the reality is you're rejecting me as well. And that's a very heavy statement to make because they didn't think it was like that. And that's why the reaction is so so extreme. I mean, they had a halachic, hashkafic reason for doing what they did and what they saying what they said, and that is a shir unto itself. But you see from the reaction how shocked they were by Kodesh Baruch Hu's reaction, that they thought that they were doing something that right, and to find it was exactly the opposite. The question, what were they missing? What was the point they were missing? And really, it's no different what's going on today. And all historically, that was a galus. As much as the Shechina was with them in the midbar, and they're living in the midbar, and they were doing, whatever they were doing, but the reality was it was not Eretz Canaan. It was not Eretz Israel. It was galus. They were in the diaspora at that time, and they chose to remain there. And choose to remain there. Basically, that was the mistake. Even though they had been there for a period of time, that's where Kodesh Baruch Hu had brought them, and they had lived there and done their thing. But the reality was, the time had come to go home. The time had come to go to Israel. They refused that opportunity, and it cost them. And this is really the basis of this entire seminar, a fundamental question that we have to ask, because it's part and parcel of Jewish history, and that is, why is it that the Jewish people seem to overstay their welcome in galus, in exile? It seems that wherever we've gone, whatever exile, some have been better than others, some have been bad from the beginning and never really got much better, but some have been, certainly, palpable or palatable and palpable, and very often there was a golden era. We were able to succeed to a tremendous extent, and somehow, even the places that we thought we were safe and secure, and most recently perhaps Europe, and certainly today America and Canada and England, all the places we are today, that we have golden eras, we have periods of time that seem to indicate that we're being successful, and not just successful, but that we were secure and safe, only to find the situation to deteriorate and become backwards and become dangerous, and ultimately either force us into exile once again, or worse, genocide, as has been the case many times throughout history. The question is, why is it that the Jewish people overstay their welcome? Why do we end up staying in exile too long? Meaning that the exile turns against us. You have to understand what it means, too long. How do you figure out when it is too long in the first place? How do we measure an exile? These are questions that have to be addressed. But it just seems that wherever we are, until Mashiach comes, the Jewish people are victimized in some place, inevitably, eventually at some point in time. We are gambling right now. We're assuming that we're safe other places in the world right now, that the Gentile world will never turn against us like it once did, in spite of the fact that there's tremendous anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-Semitism in the world today, and in spite of the fact that the economy is seemingly falling out, which is never good for the Jewish people, that we assume the situation will not get much worse than it has been up until now. And that's always a gamble. That's a dangerous situation. So that's the first question to be dealt with. The second question really is the basis, or at least is important to address, really the basis of the seminar, and that is that the events happen today because it's, on one hand you could deal with the idea of exile, but it could be there's still many exiles left to go. It could be that this exile might be coming to an end, and therefore maybe important to actually move on. But the reality is that maybe there are more exiles. How do we know what to do? How do we know it's not simply a case of moving on to some other place? Why is Eretz Israel the target at this point? Why is it the place that Jewish people have to focus on and go to, and certainly put into their consciousness, right? And how do we know the current events of today? The current events today are basically they're Achris Yamim type events. That's really a question. Like, is this simply just a development process? Some people even believe wrongly that it's possible to be rejected and thrown out of the land once again. Forget about the Gentile nations, but just from Hashgacha Prati's point of view, that maybe Kodesh Baruch Hu can get angry. If you look at the equality of life, spiritual life in Eretz Yisrael today, that perhaps the land will throw us out once again. It's not going to happen. There's a reason why it's not going to happen. But even if it's not going to happen, what about the Jews in the diaspora? Maybe there's a place left to go. Maybe we have to go someplace like Alaska. We've gone everywhere else we could possibly go to, which is one of the reasons why it's not going to happen again, except the Eretz Yisrael. But how do we know the events of today are Achris Yamin type of events? What's going on with the Palestinian people, the idea of a two-state solution, the fact that the UN is backing them and standing behind them, and no matter what the Jewish people do, that it seems to be not enough. And in spite of the fact that we're the ones who have unilaterally tried to make peace, we're the ones being accused of impeding the peace process, because basically we won't lie down and roll over and die for the rest of the world. What are the proofs? What are the simanim? Okay, there's certain things to focus on and look at. So first of all, to begin with, and it's a very telling thing. Number one, there is a Gemara that has a Gadata. It's a Gemara in Baba Basra, and there's a series of stories that is the topic of many commentators on Medrash in the Gemara. For example, the Vilna Gaon wrote a commentary on the Midrash because they're very obscure. Some of them are, some maybe simple stories, but others basically are kind of wild, outlandish, and we just take them in stride. And knowing that the Chachamim are who they are, and what they say, what they do is basically with Hakadosh, that there might be some deeper meaning, but we can't always be privy to that meaning. But in this particular case, the Medrash are talking about a Tana, Rabbi Bar Chana, and he lived back at the time, the time of the time that the Mishnah was being recorded. Later on, the Gemara, more the Amoraim, and in the story, there's quite a few stories, and one of the stories he has is quite well known, at least probably in the Shuvasha world, and that is the fact that he and his colleagues apparently were on a boat sailing around, at sea someplace, and they came across what they thought was an island. Not necessarily a big island, but an island. And it occurred to them that maybe what they'll do is they'll get off the boat and they'll, dock at this island a bit and, have a barbecue. Jews like to have barbecues all the time. Give us an opportunity. We have a barbecue. And they did exactly that. They set up a fire on top of this fish that apparently probably was upside down, lying on its back at this time. Not exactly sure, but again, it's a medrash, and those details don't concern us. What concerns us is the story and the moral that comes out of it. And apparently, what happened is they began to cook and they began to bake and do whatever they were doing. The fish felt the heat. They felt the heat, and according to the medrash, the fish turns over, and as it turns over, of course, they begin to fall into the water, and they realize their terrible mistake. They had mistaken a fish for an island. I'm not exactly sure how that happens, but again, doesn't concern us. And they fall into the water, and they happily get to their boat just in time, and as a result of that, they're able to save themselves and to sail off. And Rabbi Bar Chana says that, as he's describing the story, he says, had it not been for the fact that the boat had been close at hand, then we would have drowned. Because we fell into the water, we could swim back, whatever, we would have drowned. As a result, the boat was there. Because the boat was there, we were saved. So, Rabbeinu Yaakov, who wrote also, he wrote a perush, a commentary on the Gadata of the Gemara. He's famous mostly for his Sefer Yesivas HaMishpat. He lived in the 1700s, towards the end of the 18th century there. And he wrote a commentary on this particular medrash, this Gadata, and he said the following thing. And it's remarkable because you have to understand and appreciate the setting of this commentary, because at this point in time, in Europe, the idea of the Jewish people once again having the land was a very, very distant dream. It wasn't, really a real possibility. The Jewish people, if anything, were being persecuted. They were hated. They were down. It was a very tough time, as the Ziva Zohar points out, that the blood of the Jewish people at that time, Cheved Mashiach, was filling the streets. It was a very rough time. So the idea of actually getting back there to Israel and taking it over once again was a distant, distant dream. But he writes at that time that this medrash is an Achris HaYamin medrash. It's an allusion to the future. That Rabbi Bar Chana was looking to the future with Ruach HaKodesh, a little low level of nevuah. And he saw, and there's lots of things in the Gemara. Tanoim wrote lots of things about Achris HaYamin. They were in touch, some either through Kabbalah or perhaps Masara, about end-of-days type of experiences, and they write about this in Sanhedrin. And he says that Rabbi Bar Chana saw the end of days, and this story is really just a mashal. The nimshal, the actual parable, is that the fish, the island, basically represents, let's say, the situation the Jewish people will find themselves, achris yamim, and that is, they'll be living in the land, He says that we will be rulers over the land and over another people, he says. And the Jewish people will think that this people has no way to rebel and to change the situation, and as a result of that, we won't necessarily treat them the way we should treat them, or just whatever, not show enough respect. It won't be an ideal situation, okay? And because of this, this people will rebel. They will rebel in the end. They will, dislike the situation, and they will turn the plate over on its mouth. That's his parish. That's the language that Gemara uses with respect to Eov in terms of his dealing with the situation. Turning the plate over in the mouth is basically a way of saying that kind of flip-flop creation, turn things over, the opposite of what's supposed to be. And this people will try to reverse the situation where they will go from being second-class citizens, from being the ones who are ruled over, to becoming the rulers. That's what he says. That's what's going to happen. He says that if Mashiach is close at hand, that's the boat represents Mashiach. He says if Mashiach is close at hand, at that time when this is all taking place, and certainly that's Achros Yamin for sure, he says then we'll be okay, we'll be saved. Mashiach will save the day, this people will fail, and we know there have been opportunities over the last couple of decades that could have been very messianic. The 6-Day War, for example, is one of them. That was a very messianic period of time, meaning that it was miraculous, and the idea, anytime 6 shows up, by the way, is always a number to do with Geulah. The fact that the actual war should last that long, miraculously, and that it should be called that, is an allusion also to the 6 days of Ma'aseh Bereshis, and also the 6,000 years, and the 6 spheres of Chesed through Yesod. It's a very Geulah-oriented number, an idea, especially with Yosef, and therefore Mashiach ben Yosef. So there certainly have been opportunities where the Jewish people might have been able to transform the situation, to go, the full distance with it, and turn to Yemos and Mashiach. We didn't do that. So, if Mashiach is close at hand, he said, and the Jewish people will do fine, we'll survive, we'll be saved, and everything will end happily ever after. That's what he says. He says, however, if the boat, so to speak, is not close at hand, if Mashiach is not ready to come at the time it's all taking place, then we will drown from the majority of the problems they create for us. We will drown from them. They will overwhelm us, he says. Now, this measure, this parish, this explanation has been around for a long time. It's been around now for a couple hundred years. And maybe people knew about it, maybe people didn't know about it, they didn't pay attention to it because it didn't make much difference, it didn't make much sense. Even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we might not have been able to comprehend how this situation, all out war with the Arab world and lose the land, God forbid, or be killed or pushed into the sea. These are threats we've had to deal with, but we never thought that the rebellion would take place from inside the country, so to speak, and that rebellion would be so successful as to turn the plate over on its mouth, meaning that they were able successfully to convince CNN and all the other news stations, and the BBC for sure, they're just ready and waiting to get onto this boat over here, and that they're the David, and that we're the Goliath. That's the way the world looks at it. We are still to this very day the underdogs. We don't look that way because we're so smart sometimes, and mostly because Hashgacha Pratis, the Baruch Hu saved us, and all the atomic bombs in the world's not going to help us in the end. All it can do basically is guarantee that if we go down, they go down too. But we still remain to be the David, throwing the stones. Perhaps, unfortunately, not coming in the name of Hashem like we ought to, but that's the way it really is, but that's not the way the world perceives it today. No matter what we do, what we say, it's always the opposite of the reality, and we are blamed for impeding the peace process, even though they're the ones who won't give it anything. They won't acknowledge every existence. They won't do whatever has to be done for security reasons. And only the suicidal people in government are prepared to go ahead anyhow and complete the process. Phenomenal medrash and perush that in today's context makes perfect sense, and that's an Achros Yamin medrash. Now, of course, if you don't believe in Torah, you don't believe in the Gemara, you don't believe in Ruach HaKodesh, it's not going to make a difference to somebody. But if somebody is going to sit back and say, I do believe in these things. I do hold to these, Ruach HaKodesh and the Rabbi Barchana and Rabbi Yaakov and about this, and And certainly, I mean, the match of the present day reality, and the situation described in the Medrash is tremendous. It's tremendous, and because of that, we have to assume that the situation today is very much, potentially, at least with this Medrash alone, Achrus Yamim material. Okay, so that's the first point. The first point as to why we have to look at the events of today is not simply some events that, it's just an up or down, whatever the situation may be, that there may be still hundreds of years to go. Some people think thousands of years even, but certainly decades, according to many, that this what's going today is, just the reason, if anything, just to hunker down and to kind of like entrench yourselves and weather the storm and wait B'ezras Hashem for better times. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Not this way. And if it does, anyhow, usually it gets a lot worse before it gets better, and some kind of transformation takes place as well. But this Medrash is telling us that the Palestinian situation today is really, if anything, a siman. It's a sign of that we are living in very, very unique period of history. Then we go more to a Kabbalistic understanding of history as it stands right now. We are in the year 5772 now, 2011 still, about to become 2012 as well, shown in a couple months. And that is now 22 years into a period of time that began back in 1990. The famous 10th hour of the 6th day of history, so to speak. In other words, that we have a correlation, we have an understanding that each day of Ma'aseh Bereshis, from the average person's point of view, that basically Ma'aseh Bereshis were events that took place way back at the beginning, almost 6,000 years ago. They are the basis, obviously, for all that's happening today and all through history. I mean, that's the beginning. The same way, for example, you're born as a baby into this world, that even though today you might be an adult, but the baby was the beginning part of the entire thing. But it's long gone. We're not even interested. We don't go back even to look at baby pictures that much. We don't go back to look at, we look like as children. Once in a while it comes up, but it doesn't concern us so much because we don't really believe that it is so important today. What counts today is who I am right now and what I'm able to achieve, what I'm thinking. But in fact, really the truth is, it is important to go and go back into the past. Most people only do that when they have serious problems. But the truth is, every individual should do it because it helps you to better understand where you're holding today. Likewise, it is that way with history as well. That inasmuch as the 6 days of Ma'aseh Bereshis were events that took place way back at the beginning, as Kabbalah explains, the Gra details, that all the events of the 6 millennia that are going to follow since the 6 days of creation are rooted in the 6 days themselves. And he goes so far as to say that everything that's ever going to happen in a corresponding millennium, meaning the first day corresponds to the first millennium, and the second day corresponds to the second millennium, so on and so forth, until you get to the 6th day, which corresponds to our millennium. We are now in the 6th millennium since 5,000. He says the basis of all the events, even though history seems to be randomly unfolding and events are coming out, as they come out, and it's almost like just a cause and effect relationship because he did that, he said that, and this guy was elected, and they went to war, and it's like that's history. That's history. Big Bang Theory, all these things. That's what history is about. It's not like you can't even go ahead and say that history, is predictable that much, and certainly that there's not much of a kesher between today and the day of day 6 of Ma'aseh Bereshis, other than the fact that preceded all of this. But Kabbalah says no. Kabbalah says that the basis for every event taking place and why it takes place at that time in that specific way is based upon the fact that the events took place that way on day 6 as well. So whatever happens in the course of a millennium, you can trace it back to corresponding events during the day. So, for example, the classic example that I think is a very good example to use, and that is both Batei Mikdashos, both temples were destroyed in the 4th millennium. Right? The first one was destroyed in 3338, which is 423 BCE, and the second temple was destroyed in 3830, which basically 70 CE, right? More recently, the time of the Romans. The first one by the Babylonians, and the second one by the Romans. Both the same millennium. Now, they weren't destroyed before that. A certain specific moment in time, they were destroyed. And for a period of time, for example, Nebuchadnezzar, who at that time was the king of Babylon, and he didn't even think about destroying the Beis Hamikdash. He was even in favor of the Beis Hamikdash existing. Why was it all of a sudden he changed his mind and the Beis Hamikdash was not only destroyed, but where's the potential? How do people get the possibility to be able to actually destroy the temple? Why didn't the land repel him? Why did the Beis Hamikdash withstand his attack? It's the house of God. The Shekhinah was sure, especially the first Beis Hamikdash. The second Beis Hamikdash, you don't have the same divine connection as you had the first time. The first one for sure, built by Shlomo Melech. How is it possible they could even touch the place? It's so holy in the end. Okay? So, the answer has to be somehow on day 4 of Ma'aseh Bereshis, because that's the root of the events of day 4 of history in the 4th millennium. So, you look at day 4 and you ask yourself, well, what happened that was unique on day 4 of Ma'aseh Bereshis that could be the basis of the Jewish people being exiled and the Beis Hamikdash, both temples being destroyed? What was unique about that? So, on a Pasuk level, there's not much difference. I mean, you have to pay very, very close attention. As Rashi points out, is talking about the creation of the sun and the moon and the stars and the lights. And, in one place it refers to the lights as Ma'orot, right? With written Male and all of its letters, Mem, Aleph, Vav, Resh, Vav, Tav. And the second time, when it mentions the lights, it mentions it Chaser. It's missing one Vav. Again, the Vav is 6, tied to Geulah. Lots of connections over here in terms of that. So the Rashi points this out. Mem Aleph Vav Mem Aleph Resh Vav Tav. I believe that's the way it is, missing the first Vav. And the question is, why? Now the Torah is very medactic. It's very exact. The Torah, as the Ramban points out, is one big long name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu received the entire thing at one time. He was told where to put the hafsakas, the breaks in the words of the Torah, so they actually form stories out of the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not simply like writing a book where you just use whatever words you have to use, and they're all meaningful, except the fact that they're not all imperative necessarily, but by the Torah it's different. So one letter is missing from a Sefer Torah, as the halacha states, not because the sofer blew it and left it out, but basically because that's the way it's supposed to be. So usually it opens up for a drush. It usually is an indication of something that's supposed to wake us up and make us realize that there's a deeper level of meaning here, because we have pardes, pshat, remez, drush, and sod, the 4 levels in which Torah can be learned. Pshat is a simple level, remez is a hint. That would be a hint. That would form the category of remez, because the missing vav is a hint to a deeper meaning. Drush is already the medrash, and then of course sod is Kabbalah, the Zohar on the Torah, and all the different perushim. So the question is, what's pshat? So Rashi explains. He brings the Gemara from Chulun, Samach Amud Beis, and the Gemara brings a little story about how on the 4th day of creation, when the HaKadosh Baruch Hu was making the sun and the moon, they were both going to be just as bright as each other. There's Kabbalah behind this. This is a very important Kabbalah, explanation over here. The Zohar spends a lot of time about this, but on this, and the moon says, Hashem, I don't mean to complain. Obviously you're the boss around here, and you know what's going on. And no one else knows it better than you do. But just thinking about it, just occurred to me that maybe the idea of two kings wearing the same crown, it's not going to fly. Because we know later on, for example, that no 2 kings of the Jewish people could overlap, so someone had to go. And here also, maybe it's not a good idea to have 2 kings wearing the same crown, meaning that both the sun and the moon should have the same level of intensity of light. And again, this is talking spheres Kabbalistically at this point. And Hashem says, well, I think I know what you're indicating. And I think what you're doing over here, this is called jealousy. In the 4th day of creation, already jealousy has made its impact on Ma'aseh Bereshis, is showing you how deeply rooted jealousy is in this world. I mean, jealousy destroys. It's an incredible negative relationship. Cain kills Hevel because of jealousy. The brothers sell Yosef into slavery because of jealousy. Whatever other explanations, L'Shem Shemayim, things people have to explain why they're jealous, and they hide it and bury it and cover it up, and Geulah, they don't have it whatsoever. They're blaming the other person for why they're feeling what they're lacking, and can turn the whole world upside down because of jealousy. It's incredible how much damage can be done because of it in this world, as the Chumash points out. So here also on the 4th of creation, jealousy is already making its impact. Things are going wrong. before man even walks the face of the earth. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, because you're the one being jealous and you're the one doing this, and this is a rule about life in general, by the way, that you reduce your light. You wanted me to reduce the light of the sun so that you could have all the brilliance. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says just the opposite is going to happen. If jealousy is going to drive you to try to reduce the light of somebody else, the result is going to be a reduction in your own light, not the other. That's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu works. And as a result of that, the moon is reduced in its brilliance, and it's called Midah Lavana. The Zohar spends a lot of time on the concept of Midah Lavana, and one of the things that we identify in Moshe Mashiach is based upon the fact that the moon will once again get its light. The sun also will be increased in light, but the moon will get back its intensity of light and once again shine with brilliance. And again, even though there's a beautiful little story about jealousy to teach kids before going to bed, it's actually quite Kabbalistic instead, and the moon is not as guilty as the story makes out to be in the end, at least in this story. But that's what happens. The light of the moon is reduced on day 4 because of what goes on between the moon and the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so good. We now found something inherently lacking in day 4 of creation. The question is, what does that have to do with the Jewish people and the Beis Hamikdash and the corresponding millennium? So the Gemara in Sukkah explains that when there is a solar eclipse, that the sun's light is actually blocked, it's a bad siman for the nations of the world who are tied for the 365 days of the solar year because they're tachas hashemesh, they're owning this world. But when the light of the moon is blocked, when there's a lunar eclipse, it's a bad siman for the Jewish people because the moon represents Klal Yisrael. The moon is the symbol of the Jewish people because there's lots of things about the moon. First of all, that the moon itself it waxes and wanes just like the Jewish people. Other nations come and go, right? They exist and they disappear, but the Jewish people always come back at some point in time. It was the brink of extinction like no other people. But somehow we rebuild ourselves, Baruch Hashem, because of Hashgacha Pratis. That's part of the miracle of the Jewish people. The second thing, perhaps the most important thing, is the way the moon functions. The moon is just a rock floating out in space, but you look at it at night, and especially a full moon, it's so bright it can light up an entire field without any artificial lighting. Beautiful. Where's it getting its light from? From the sun. Where's the sun? Can't see it. But somehow the light of the sun is able to hit the moon and reflect to the earth and light it up. So that's why the first mitzvah the Jewish people received in Mitzrayim was the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, even though you couldn't do the mitzvah until you left Mitzrayim, you got to Israel, you established a Sanhedrin after conquering the land. It took 7 years to conquer the land, 7 years to divide it up, and finally the Sanhedrin would sit, you could make the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, right, and then you do the mitzvah. So why would that be the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people on the way to Mitzrayim? So every mitzvah was given to the Jewish people based upon the moment of time that it was given, because somehow the message behind the mitzvah was relevant to what was going on at that stage of history, because everyone knows that's the best way to educate somebody. If it's hot and it's relevant at that time in their life, so that's where they're open to hear the message. But what was Kiddush HaChodesh have to do with the Yetziat Mitzrayim, with the leaving of Egypt? It's because Baruch Hu said. He said, you are going to go out of Mitzrayim, but you're going out for a reason. I did not turn history upside down and interfere in such an overt way, which I don't like doing that much, you should know. I really don't. I prefer much more to work behind the scenes, but the situation has forced me, and I'm doing that. But there's a reason why I did it, not just to free you. There's lots of nations I can free the same way. But you are the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and your purpose in this world is to be an Or L'Goyim. That's what you're here to do. You're here to be an Or L'Goyim, a light unto nations. Now, you might think that means E equals MC squared, which is nice thing to come up with as well. And that might be all the Nobel laureates that you see, the whole long list of them all through history, where they found this cure and that situation, which is also great. There's no reason why we cannot contribute to the betterment of mankind, but not at the cost of Torah, not at the cost of the long-term and short-term goals of the Jewish people. There's lots of from scientists, there's lots of from businessmen, There's lots of from explorers even. I don't actually know too many from explorers, but we've had them all over the place. We have people in every capacity, it seems almost, and that's why there's so many from people accomplishing great things, but not at the cost of Torah mitzvahs. So Kosh Baruch Hu says the same way that the moon reflects the light of the sun, your job is to reflect my light to the world. And this Or LaGoyim is more like reflector to the Goyim. Your job is to reflect the light of the sun, that's me, to the world. And if you don't, the world will be in nighttime and darkness, and of course there'll be anti-Semitism, the world will fall apart, and you will not have fulfilled your mission for having left Mitzrayim. In case, I'll just put you right back as the Torah threatens in Parashat Kisavo, after all the suffering we go through along the way. So, from this we see that the reduction of the brilliance of the moon on day 4 was indicative of a potential reduction in the light of the Jewish people in the corresponding 4th millennium. And for all we know, what happened to the moon exactly, precisely, maybe once, twice, because as the lesson points out, the reduction of the Or HaGenuz, which began on day 1, which is tied, which is the hidden light of creation, the Kosh Baruch Hu made the first day, is tied to the reduction of the light of the moon, and this happens all week long. The light's being reduced until finally it's hidden completely, as much as Kosh Baruch Hu is going to hide it. So, but you learn from this. That's the important point: is that the basis of the events of a specific millennium can be traced back to the events of its corresponding day. And there's many examples like this, and we can go through and chart it out. The problem is that we don't know which hour God did what on day 1, on day 2, on day 3, on day 4, on day 5, and on. No, it's different by day 6. The Gemara in Sanhedrin on Lamed Ches Amud Beis, and the beautiful thing about this presentation we're doing here is that normally you have basically an hour and a half to give over some of these ideas. The book, the manual itself, goes into more detail than the actual presentation because people have limited attention spans, and you can only give over so much information at one time. But in this particular presentation, we can do this over the course of many weeks, B'ezras Hashem, so I can afford to go into more detail. And you can pick and choose based upon how much you can present. But it's important for the presenter, even if he's not going to give over all the material, that he knows in the back of his mind. That's what's going on. So, if this is the case, then basically, so the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Lamed Ches Amud Beis talks about the 12 hours of day 6, the 12 daylight hours of day 6. And there it details hour by hour what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was doing in the process of creating man, right to the process of the moment when HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Chava, his wife, and they had children on day 6. Cain was born with one twin sister. Hevel was born with 2 twin sisters. The fight between the 2 of them actually was over Hevel's second twin sister, and the Medrash says, and then of course the commandment not to eat from the 8th of Das Tov Ra, and the 10th hour, Kosh Baruch Hu, after telling them Adam and Chava, Adam they ate from the 8th of Das Tov Ra, they broke the commandment. The 11th hour they were judged. The 12th hour it says they were expelled. However, according to the Medrash, they stayed through Shabbos and left actually Moshe Shabbos into exile. And that was the end of paradise and Gan Eden until Yom Mashiach and onward. So day 6, it does tell us what the Kodesh Baruch Hu was doing hour by hour. Now, having said that, that's important because the most important event, obviously it's nice to know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did in the first 5 days of my celebration, what time he did it, because then we can find out why the events of the last 5 millennia happened when they happened and how they happened and all that. But the one that concerns us the most is the one in which Adam Rishon actually ate from the 8th of Das Tov Ra, because that's the one that's responsible for all the exile we have experienced and since then. Even the exiles of the Jewish people are really a subset of the exile of all of mankind that occurred in the beginning by the story of the Chilus 8th of Das Tov Ra. So that is an important moment in time. The precise moment, which we don't know, is I don't know, right? But the hour, and Kabbalah explains the time at that time was also different. It was an hour was much longer than say an hour is today because of the level of creation at that time. So it wasn't like a 60-minute hour as we have today, but it was an hour based upon the Tzotze Kedusha, which is a discussion that hopefully we'll get to later on, B'ezras Hashem. But the point is that That's the critical moment, because here's a rule. There's a klal, and the klal is every moment that results in a major kilkul, a major destruction. Every moment that results in a galus of some sort, by definition, had the potential to be a moment for Geulah and for binyan and building. In other words, the moment that Adam could decide to eat from the Eitz Das Tova Ra or not eat from the Eitz Das Tova Ra was a moment that if he had chosen not to do it, we know what happened because he did do it. We know the events that Torah describes them. We know what's happened historically. But let's say that he'd abstained from eating from the Eitz Das Tova Ra, that rather than going to Galus, it would have eliminated the evil from creation, transformed the tree of knowledge of good and evil into the tree of life, and this would have happened by Shabbos, 3 hours later, and that would have rectified all of creation. Adam HaRishon would have had the status of Mashiach at that point in time, and we wouldn't need this seminar. Instead, we'd be learning Torah with the Shekhinah, Gan Eden, until this very day onward, until we go to the world to come. That's what would have happened. So Chazal point out, this is the reason why the word Nachash, which means snake, and Mashiach, which of course means Mashiach, is equal. Because the Nachash was the one who prompted us to make the mistake and go into exile, and Mashiach will be the one to take us out later on, at the end of history. Mashiach will be coming to rectify primarily the mistake of Adam HaRishon, of mankind. So therefore, what concerns us today as the Jewish people, but the world in general, is that the moment of the Achila and where it comes up later on, because according to the Klal of the Gra, history repeats itself big time, because whatever's going to happen in the 6th millennium is tied back to the 6th day of Ma'aseh Bereshis. So therefore, as of 1990, now how do we get to 1990? Okay, so normally, if you wanted to figure out what one day of Ma'aseh Bereshis corresponds to in the course of a millennium, it's very simple. You take 1,000 years, divide by 24 hours, and that gives you 43.66 years. So that would mean that 1 hour of Ma'aseh Bereshis, whatever it was back at that time, but 1 hour is a unit, would correspond to a period of time in the corresponding millennium to 43.66 years. The first 43.66 years would correspond to the first hour of day 6, and so on and so forth, right, which would have begun at nighttime and gone for 12 hours until the next day, which would have been the daytime, until sundown, when the next day would have begun by 3 stars coming out. That's true, and we use that calculation for many things. However, since, as the Leshem explains, based upon Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, that we are only concerned with the creation events, because the events of history are not going to be based upon void moments. It's not because Hashem did not create at nighttime. He didn't do any creating at nighttime. All the creating Kosh Baruch did on each day only took place during the daytime. And those events of creating, and whatever happened, were the basis of the events of history. So even though we're dealing with 1,000 years as one day, we don't divide by 24, but by the 12 creation hours of each day for this particular relationship. That's what Leshem explains. So the Rokeach finds a hint to this, basically, because the word, it says, V'yechulu shemameres b'chol tzavakam, right? We read towards the end of the first Aliyah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu completed all of the heavens and earth and all that he planned to create. The word V'yechulu, which we read for Kiddush on Friday night, which means, and they were completed, right? He completed them. And the word V'yechulu is also written Chasr, meaning it's missing a Vav, and because it's missing the Vav, it has the gematria of 72, says the Rokeach, and 72 means 12 times 6. So we're talking, when it says, V'yechulu, means that the 12 hours of each of the 6 days, that was the basis of Ma'aseh Bereshis. So rather than divide by 24, we divide by 12, as the Leshem points out. 1,000 divided by 12 is equal to 83.33 years, which means that every 83.33 years in the course of history will correspond to 1 hour of creating time in Ma'aseh Bereshis. So, based upon that, so you have the situation that that the Adam age in the 10th hour, and you want to figure out what the 10th hour of day 6 corresponds to the course of the 6th millennium. You just chart it out. The first hour would be the year 5, using the Jewish calendar because it's even, it's equal, it's easier. So 5,000 to 5,083.33 would be the first year. right? So 5,083.34 would be the beginning of the second year and last another 83.33 years. And you just chart it out, right on, you can do it in the computer, on a spreadsheet program. Turns out that the 10th hour of the 6th millennium that corresponds to the hour in which Adam Rishon ate would be 1990 or 5750, the Jewish dating system. And that would begin officially the 10th hour of the day 6 of history, as of 1990. And that was 22 years ago. We're now 22 years into the period of time that corresponds to when Adam Rishon made the fateful mistake of breaking the command of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and eating from the Eitz Das Tavara, a moment that could have been Geulah for all mankind forever, instead resulting in Galus for all mankind until Mashiach comes. And now history's come along, and that potential moment, because it only happened, it did because that was the moment in history when it could happen. It all comes down to that. Moments are not random. They're based upon combinations of Hashem's names. So when things happen, they happen historically for a specific reason. So if Adam ate, that was like the weakness in the moment right there. It was all building up, and it got to that moment. So likewise, we are building towards a moment. And more than likely, if that moment had the potential for the complete redemption, but it became the complete exit, the complete galus in the end, so therefore it would make sense when it comes around the second time that that's going to be the moment of Geulah. In other words, because there's always two moments of Geulah, Achishena, and Be'itah, which we'll talk about later on, B'ezras Hashem, meaning that the Geulah can come early. Even every moment has the potential to be the redemption, but the last possible moment more than likely corresponds to the moment that Adam Rishon ate from the Eitz Das Tavara, whatever moment it works out to be in history. Because even though it's 83.33 years equals 1 hour, but still a moment comes down to a moment in every case. So the actual moment that he ate will have some kind of corresponding reality that we may be a moment away, for all we know. We don't know the exact moment, but we do know one thing, that as of 1990, for the first time in 5,750 years, the Jewish people entered an era of history for the first time in all of history that corresponds to the greatest mistake mankind has ever made. And therefore, we're the first generation to be able to rectify that mistake. That's extremely significant and very, very achris yamin. The question is, if we see anything significant at that time and onward to indicate that? And the answer is yes. First of all, that was the time of the Persian Gulf War. Everything changed, really, around 1986 to 1990, even though the Twin Towers in 2001 was a major turning point as well. But things begin to really turn around that time. First of all, between 86 and 88, 89, we had Perestroika and Gorbachev, and for the first time the Jewish people were allowed to leave willingly, in a peaceful mode, and that was the last place that Jews were being held captive because they were Jewish, en masse. And once that happened, the exile did not come to an end, but it certainly was the end of the shibud as we understand it, the oppression as we understand it. There's still Jews being oppressed in different parts of the world, but it was a major opening, and it came pitam out of nowhere. And we have a klal, another klal, to put into your package of klali. And that klal is Me'es Hashem Haisa Zos Hinivas Beinenu. This, which comes and surprises us, and we didn't see it coming. We all stand back and go, "Wow, that's amazing! Didn't see that happening. Didn't predict that one happening." When that happens, that's called overt hashgacha pratis. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu jumps into history in a more obvious way and performs a miracle and brings about a specific result because it's part of the Geulah process. It's part of the Geulah process. And then in 1990 with the Persian Gulf War, which on one hand, really seems to have very little to do with this, but the reality is, and this is the most amazing thing that people don't realize and people don't focus on, but that war was the turning point in the relationship between the American people and the Arabs. Because to fight that war, which also didn't make sense, going to Kuwait and expecting no one to fight back, ridiculous. Meis Hashem, Haisa Zos, he lives Veinenu. Again, a weird situation. Overt hashgacha pratis. He goes in there, and And as a result of that, Hussein gets beaten back eventually. But in order to be able to fight that war, the Americans were forced to make peace with the Arab world. They were called the Great Satan. I don't know if you remember that, but that was like, the Jewish people, the Zionists, whatever, and the Great Satan was America. And in order to be able to fight that war, the Americans required a place to land their planes to fight from. They had a base over there in the Middle East. It couldn't be Israel because that would simply be like, a Jewish war. So they had to make peace with the Arab world, and it came at a great cost. And that was when the pressure by George Bush Sr. was put upon the Jewish people to begin the process of giving land to the Palestinian people, stopping to build in land that belonged to us in the settlements of West Bank, and what they call the Shtachim, and that was the beginning of that turning point. Until that, it was coming, but that was the moment that things began to turn around in 1990. But how is that Eitz Hadas Tovaraish, so to speak? What does it do with the tree of knowledge of good and evil? So another event, very significant, took place at that time. That again, most people don't think about these terms, but it's absolutely ironic. And since we're saying that all the events of history have to be mushrash, rooted back in Maaseh Bereshis, so this event has to be rooted back in Maaseh Bereshis. It's not just the next technological advancement that comes along in history, but there's a reason why it happens at that specific time. And that was the time that the World Wide Web, which was being developed privately or behind the scenes, made its appearance into the world in general, the World Wide Web. And I think everybody would agree there's no greater modern technical version of the Eitz Hadas Tovara more than the internet. A tree of knowledge, incredible. Incredible. In fact, in 1989, as it was emerging, Newsweek ran an article called "The Generation of Knowledge." Right, Dora Dea. Sounds familiar, right? Going back, most of the time. Dora Dea, the generation of knowledge, because that's what we were about to become at that time. And the exile did not come to an end when Russia collapsed. Rather, the exile turned a corner. It turned a very dangerous corner, and no longer was an issue of simply physical survival, but more like a spiritual, intellectual survival. We are plagued to this day. The number one plague, spiritually, it seems to be today amongst the Jewish people, is the impact the internet is having upon us. On one hand, it's an Eitz Hadas Tov. The amount of good knowledge is unbelievable, and how quickly you can access it, and on all levels, and every day, just more information. Sfarim are being scanned on a momentary basis and put in there. Medical information, historical information. I'm even shocked to find things that I thought, from the past, that, who had the time to put this in? Who had the time to make this entry? Because, who thought about this? And it's there anyhow. It was crucial and saved me time, while reading up certain material. And how many lives it must have saved. The tree of knowledge of good for sure, but of evil, incredibly as well. Absolutely incredible because the klipos, they latch on to it. Whatever is potential for good has equal potential for evil, and we know the results of what's going on in the world to such an extent. The Gedolim have had to make many gezeras against it to try to curb the effect of it, because that's exactly what it is. But who thinks about what it really is, spiritually speaking? But it came exactly at the beginning of the 10th hour, just as it should have, right? 5750 around that time. Go back to the history books. There it is. It's been growing. And now we see the exile of the Jewish people is an exile of mind. Because we have many people today who are even anti-Israel, anti the Jewish people, even anti-Semitic for that matter. And there's not much fence sitting anymore. There's not much time to fence it. Rather, instead, we're being forced to go this way or go that way. But it's all an issue of what you learn, the impact it has upon you, and what you think about it, and where you're going intellectually from this point onward. So 1990 certainly began the period of the 10th hour of day 6. Kach nira, it seems for sure that's the case. So much to support the idea, which means that we are living, by definition, in a period of historic tikkun. Tremendous opportunity, already 22 years in that period of time. But, as we said, it's an 83.33 year period of history, and therefore 22 years would still leave another 61 years to go until the end of that period of time. For all we know, Adam 8 right at the end of the 10th hour, not the middle of the beginning. So, it doesn't mean the events of today are Achros Yamim. Yeah, there's no question that we're leading there, and this has an Achros Yamim type feel to it, but Like how achris is it? Are we right there towards the end of it? That's the question. Anyway, so we need more information. And the Zohar provides it. It's uncanny, by the way, how sometimes information you think shouldn't be there is in fact there, not a lot of it, but just exactly what you need to make the point that you need to make. It takes research, takes follow-up, and you have to really be able to track it down. But fortunately, people like the Leshem bring these out because it's a Zohar, interesting enough, does not show up very often anywhere except the Zohar itself. But the Leshem makes a point of it, this piece of information. Rabbi Kamenetsky is the daughter of Rav Yosef Shalom Eliyashiv, Shleimah Hashem, and she, of course, is the great granddaughter of the Leshem Rav Shlomo Eliyashiv, the Baal Leshem wrote the Sfarim that I just referred to, and someone asked her about this particular point, which I'm about to bring up, and her comment was, if the Leshem said it, it's got to be true. The Leshem wrote it, you can rely upon it, it's got to be true, which is very powerful because it's a very powerful point. And what's that point? The point is the following thing, that according to the Zohar, the period of Techis HaMesim, which we call resurrection of the dead. Now, resurrection of the dead is a concept that many people believe will happen after the year 6000, once we begin to go into the period of time called Olam Haba. History, as the Gemara says, will last until year 6000. Rabbi Akiva's is really 6093, but the discussion, not really doesn't change anything. But 6000, as much as we know, from year 6000 onward, because it was called Olam Nefashah, it's already the tikkun for the soul from the years we did in preparation for the world to come. It's a very spiritual world. The Gemara calls 1,000 years of charuv, destroyed, but destroyed, as Chazal pointed, does not mean nuclear holocaust, God forbid, but rather, or the solar system blowing up, but rather it means that the physical world as we know it will become elevated, become far more spiritual, just like a person goes from childhood to adolescence, from adolescence to teenagehood, to adulthood, and he leaves behind the previous periods of time. Likewise, we will leave behind Olam Hazeh. And therefore, that the Techis HaMesim will be after we come back, let's say a year 7000, which is supposed to be Yom Adin. Hashem repairs the soul, pairs the body, brings it back together again for din, for judgment, the great Yom Adin Agadol HaNeira, not Yom Kippur in this world, or Rosh Hashanah, but the ultimate day of judgment. Are you going to Gehenna? Are you going to the world to come? Right? That's going to come later on. And there you have to bring the body and soul back together again, what's called Techis HaMesim. That's the way many people understand the concept of resurrection of the dead. The Leshem explains that's not the case. And the Zohar explains that's not the case. Because basically the point of resurrection of the dead is twofold. But the main reason why is because once we were infected with the spiritual impurity of the snake back in the Garden of Eden, we became physical like this. We were once made from light. It's called Kasonas Or, skin, clothing of light. And the result of the snake's impact upon us was to physicalize all of creation, including us. And this is what's called Kasonas Or with an ayin. It's like clothing made from skin, which requires this, because when you're made from light, you don't need clothing like this. But now that you have skin like that, you have to have a fence and clothing to be tanua. As Rashi points out, it came into creation because of the result of the chet. But you can't go to the world to come like this, right? Too physical, won't get in. Can't fly, can't get up there, can't transform to another reality. So therefore, as the Leshem explains, the Techis HaMesim takes place before 6000 to return us back to the state of Kasonas Or with an aleph, made from light, like Adam Rishon was before he made the mistake of eating the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in preparation for the year 6000 to be able to go to the next stage of existence, which is completely spiritual from that point onward. So, how long does that period last? And is Mashiach there at that time? Does Mashiach come during the Techis HaMesim? Is he even necessary during the Techis HaMesim? The Gemara says anyhow, in Moshe Mashiach is already going to be shechted and gone because there's no free will in Moshe Mashiach anymore. So what about the Techis HaMesim? Is that before or after? So Leshem explains, no, you're kidding. At that point in time, from the beginning of the Techis HaMesim onward, it's not even relevant for anyone to be Mashiach. We'll all be like angels at that point. Like angels, as the Gemara says. Right? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. You'll see somebody come back resurrected. You'll think the person's an angel. Because that's what Adam looked like. He was confused for God in the beginning. That's what the Chiyas HaMesim is for. And that comes after Yemos HaMashiach. So how long does it last? Says the Zohar, says the Leshem, there's two opinions. According to Rabbi Yitzchak, it lasts 214 years, before 6,000. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it lasts 210 years, before 6,000. Which basically would mean, based upon this calculation in advance of 6,000, that as of 5772, there'll be 14 years left to the beginning of the Chiyas HaMesim, according to the Zohar, according to the Leshem. And as Rabbi Kamenetsky pointed out, when she heard this fact, it didn't faze her. She had no problem with it. The Leshem said it. Why not? Why can't it be true? Just because you didn't hear it before, because it's too fantastic to appreciate? So what? That's lots of surprises in history. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it would be another 18 years, another 4 years on top of that. The Leshem seems to go with the 214. They're both based upon psukim, and there's some interesting historical details to do with that. But that's the way the Leshem seems to go. And the reality is that if that's the case, that would mean that as of today, even though the period of the 10th hour would last another 60 some odd years, that would chop off another 50 some odd years from that calculation, leaving very little time between today and what would be called the end of history as we know it. So the Medrash, the 10th hour, the Chiyas HaMesim, which perhaps we could discuss in more detail, as Hashem, the manual actually in fact does that. But all of these things combined together, and then plus just the historical reality of everyday life. What's going on historically today, the direction things are going at this point in time, all of it seems to indicate that yes, there's no question about this. This is very, very much Achris Yamim, which means that we have to look at our involvement in history differently. We simply can't sit back and wait for things to transpire. It never has worked for us. And there's a reason for that, which we will discuss next week. In advance of next week is already in advance of Sukkot, but we'll see the calendar will play itself out. But we'll go on with this in the future. That's the next stage of the discussion.